I found the oak bench swinging gently in the breeze on my property when I came home from work on a Tuesday afternoon. And I knew immediately that the Cedar Hills HOA had finally crossed a line they couldn't uncross. My name is Xavier Zimmerman, and I had been living in Cedar Hills, a gated community just outside Austin, Texas, for about 3 years. The neighborhood itself was beautiful, full of mature oak trees and well-maintained homes with that classic hill country architecture. I had purchased my property specifically because of the oak grove that sat on the back portion of my 2-acre lot. 7 massive live oaks, some of them easily 100 years old, created this natural cathedral that I found peaceful after long days working as a software engineer downtown. The HOA had been a minor annoyance for most of my time there. Little things, you know. A complaint about my mailbox needing repainting, a notice about my grass being a 1/4 inch too tall during a drought when I was trying to conserve water. Normal suburban nonsense that I dealt with and moved on from. But this was different. This was them building something on my property without permission. I walked closer to examine the swing. It was a nice piece of work, I had to admit. Heavy wooden bench suspended by thick chains from one of the lower branches of my largest oak. The wood was stained a dark walnut color, and there were decorative cushions tied to the seat. Someone had put time and money into this. A small brass plaque on the back of the bench read, "Cedar Hills Community Rest Area, donated by the HOA Board." Community rest area, on my private property. I pulled out my phone and started taking pictures from every angle. The swing itself, the chains bolted into my tree, the plaque, and several wide shots showing clearly that this was behind my fence line, well within my property boundaries. I had my land surveyed when I bought the place specifically because I wanted to make sure I knew exactly where my property lines were. This oak grove was smack in the middle of my lot, at least 50 feet from any boundary line. My phone rang as I was documenting everything. It was my girlfriend, Emma, calling from her apartment across town. "Hey, are we still on for dinner tonight?" she asked. "Yeah, but you're not going to believe what I just found. The HOA built a bench swing in my oak grove." "Wait, what? Like they asked you and you forgot about it?" "No, like they just did it without asking. There's a plaque on it calling it a community rest area." Emma was quiet for a moment. "That's insane. That's your property, right? You're sure, completely sure I had it surveyed. This is definitely my land. What are you going to do?" That was the question, wasn't it? I could call the HOA president, a woman named Patricia Monroe who had been in charge of the board for the last 5 years. I could try to handle this diplomatically. But something about the sheer audacity of building on my property without even asking made my blood pressure spike. They didn't accidentally put this here. They made a conscious decision that my property was available for their use. "I'm going to take it down," I said. "Xavier, are you sure that's smart? Maybe you should talk to them first." "They didn't talk to me first before building on my land. I'm not going to reward that behavior by playing nice." Emma sighed. "Just be careful, okay? Don't give them ammunition to use against you." We made plans to meet at her place instead of mine, and I hung up. The sun was starting to get lower in the sky, but I had at least 2 hours of good daylight left. I went to my garage and grabbed my tools: socket wrench set, ladder, work gloves, and a tarp to lay everything on once I had it down. The chains were attached to the tree branch with heavy-duty eye bolts that had been drilled directly into the wood. I felt a flash of anger seeing the damage to my tree. These oaks were protected in Travis County. You needed permits to trim them, let alone drill holes into them. I took extra pictures of the bolts and the damage to the bark around them. It took me about 45 minutes to get everything dismantled. The bolts came out easier than I expected, which told me this had been installed recently, probably within the last few days. I carefully lowered the bench to the ground and coiled up the chains. Once everything was off the tree, I laid it all out neatly on the tarp and took a few more photos. Then I went inside and drafted a very official-looking document on my computer. I had done some Googling about trespassing laws in Texas while I worked, and I made sure everything I wrote was legally sound. Notice of trespassing this property located at 847 Oakmont Drive, Cedar Hills, Austin. TX is privately owned by Xavier Zimmerman. Any unauthorized entry onto this property or installation of structures on this property constitutes criminal trespassing under Texas Penal Code Section 30.05. The unauthorized bench swing structure installed on this property has been removed by the property owner. Any future trespassing will result in criminal complaints being filed with the Travis County Sheriff's Department. This notice serves as formal notification that permission to enter this property is explicitly denied to all Cedar Hills HOA board members and contractors acting on their behalf. I printed out 3 copies, laminated one, and left it attached to the bench with zip ties. Then I dragged the entire tarp with the bench and chains to the very front of my property, right next to the street where everyone driving by could see it. I was washing my hands in the kitchen when I saw the first car slow down to look, then another. By the time I had made myself dinner, there were actually a few people standing on the sidewalk taking pictures. I stayed inside and let them look. The phone call came at 7:30 that evening. Unknown number, but I knew who it would be. Mr. Zimmerman, this is Patricia Monroe from the Cedar Hills HOA board. Hello, Patricia. I'm calling about the community bench that was installed near your property. Several residents have informed me that you vandalized it and left it in your front yard with some sort of threatening note attached. I took a breath and kept my voice level. The bench wasn't installed near my property, Patricia. It was installed on my property without my permission or knowledge. That's called trespassing and possibly criminal mischief, depending on how you want to look at the damage done to my protected oak tree. The oak grove has always been considered a community amenity. It's visible from the walking path, and several neighbors have expressed that they've enjoyed having access to it. Patricia, I have a survey that clearly shows that grove is in the center of my private property. There is no easement for community use. There is no shared access agreement. It's my land, and you had no right to build anything on it. Her tone shifted from friendly to cold. Mr. Zimmerman, the board invested over $2,000 in that bench as an amenity for the neighborhood. You've destroyed community property. You built on my private property without permission. I removed an unauthorized structure from my land, which is absolutely my right. The bench and all the materials are sitting in my front yard, completely intact. You can come pick them up anytime. But if anyone from the HOA or acting on behalf of the HOA enters my property again without my explicit written permission, I'll be filing criminal trespassing charges. This is completely unreasonable. The community rules clearly state that all properties must maintain the aesthetic character of the neighborhood, and that includes shared green spaces. My property isn't a shared green space. It's my property. And I'd love to see where in the CC and Articus it says the HOA has the right to build structures on private property without owner consent. There was a long pause. The board will be discussing this at our emergency meeting tomorrow night. I suggest you attend if you want to resolve this amicably. I've already resolved it. You can pick up your bench. Good night, Patricia. I hung up before she could respond. My hands were shaking slightly, but I felt good. I had been clear, factual, and I hadn't lost my temper even when she tried to spin this as me being unreasonable. Emma called a few minutes later. "I'm looking at the Cedar Hills Facebook group and you're famous. Someone posted a picture of the bench in your yard. What are people saying?" "It's mixed. Some people are saying the HOA overstepped. Others are saying you're being selfish about the oak grove because it's so pretty. Oh, and someone named Brenda just commented that you're ruining property values." "Of course someone named Brenda did." Emma laughed. "Are you okay though, really?" "Yeah, I'm okay. I just need to make sure I document everything and don't give them any legitimate reason to come after me." "Do you want me to come over?" "Nah, I'm good. I'll see you this weekend. I need to do some research on property law tonight." After we hung up, I spent the next 2 hours reading Texas property law, trespassing statutes, and HOA regulations. The law was pretty clear on my side. An HOA had authority over common areas and could enforce reasonable rules about property maintenance and aesthetics, but they absolutely could not build structures on private property without permission. The fact that they had damaged a protected tree in the process made it even worse. I also pulled out my closing documents from when I bought the house and carefully read through every page of the CC and Articus, the covenants, conditions, and restrictions that govern the neighborhood. There was nothing in there about shared green spaces on private property. Nothing about the HOA having any rights to use or access private land. I made copies of the relevant pages. The next morning, I woke up to find that someone had egged the bench sitting in my front yard. Great. I took pictures of that too, then hosed it down before I left for work. I also noticed that the neighborhood Facebook group had blown up overnight with arguments about the situation. Work was a welcome distraction. I was in the middle of debugging a complex database issue when my personal phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "This is Carol Winters from the HOA board. We need to schedule a time for contractors to retrieve the bench and repair the damage to the community oak tree. When are you available?" I texted back. "The bench can be retrieved from my front yard anytime. There will be no entry onto my rear property to repair anything. The tree will heal naturally. The board has a responsibility to maintain community amenities." "It's not a community amenity. It's my private property. Any entry will be treated as trespassing." She didn't respond after that. The HOA emergency meeting was scheduled for 7 p.m. that Wednesday at the community clubhouse. I wasn't planning to go initially, but Emma convinced me that it would look bad if I didn't show up to defend myself. So at 6:45, I drove over to the clubhouse, a nice building near the front entrance of the neighborhood with a pool, gym, and meeting rooms. The parking lot was packed. Apparently, this was the most exciting thing to happen in Cedar Hills in years. I walked into the main meeting room and found at least 60 people crowded in. The room normally held about 40 comfortably. I found a seat near the back and waited. Patricia Monroe sat at the front table with 4 other board members. I recognized Carol Winters from her profile picture in the neighborhood directory. The other 3 were 2 men and another woman I had seen around but never spoken to. Patricia called the meeting to order at 7 sharp. "Thank you all for coming on short notice. We have a serious situation to address involving a community amenity and one of our residents. I'll give a brief overview, and then we'll open the floor for discussion." She proceeded to give a completely biased version of events in which the HOA had enhanced a beautiful natural area that many residents enjoyed. And I had destroyed community property and created an eyesore in the front of my home. She made no mention of property lines, surveys, or the fact that they had built on my private land without permission. When she finished, hands shot up around the room. Patricia pointed to a woman in her 50s sitting near the front. I walk past that oak grove every day on my morning walk, and I think the bench was a beautiful addition. It gave people a place to rest and enjoy nature. I think Xavier is being incredibly selfish. A murmur of agreement went through about half the room. Patricia nodded sympathetically. Another hand went up, this time a man about my age. Did the HOA get permission from Xavier before building on his property? Patricia's expression tightened. The board believed the oak grove was part of the common area based on its location near the walking path. But did you check the property survey? The man pressed. We conducted due diligence, Patricia said vaguely. I raised my hand. Patricia looked like she wanted to ignore me, but too many people had turned to look at me. Yes, Xavier. Would you like to address the board? I stood up. I'd like to clarify a few facts. First, I had my property professionally surveyed when I purchased it. The oak grove in question is located in the center of my 2-acre lot, approximately 50 feet from the nearest property line. It is unquestionably my private property. Second, I received no notification, no request for permission, no communication whatsoever before the HOA installed the bench. I came home from work and found it already built. Third, the installation involved drilling bolts into a protected oak tree, which requires permits in Travis County that I'm fairly certain the HOA didn't obtain. Fourth, I carefully removed the bench without damaging it and left it in my front yard for retrieval, along with a formal trespassing notice. Everything I did was within my legal rights as a property owner. The room erupted in overlapping conversations. Patricia banged a gavel on the table. Order, please. Xavier, the board believed in good faith that the area was available for community use. Did you check a survey? I asked directly. Patricia hesitated. We reviewed the plat map, which would have shown my property boundaries. So you knew, or should have known, that you were building on my private property. Carol Winters leaned forward. The CC and Articus give the HOA authority over aesthetic decisions in the neighborhood. I pulled out my copies of the CC and Articus. I've read every page of the covenants. There's nothing that gives the HOA the right to build structures on private property without owner consent. If you can show me the specific section that says otherwise, I'd love to see it. She couldn't, of course, because it didn't exist. An older man near the middle of the room stood up. I'm Harold Fitzgerald. I'm a real estate attorney. What Xavier is saying is correct. The HOA has no legal authority to construct anything on private property without permission. This is a clear case of trespassing and potentially property damage given the tree involved. Patricia looked flustered. The board acted in the best interests of the community. That doesn't give you the right to violate property law, Harold said firmly. The meeting devolved into chaos. People were arguing with each other, some defending the HOA, others agreeing that they had overstepped. I sat back down and let it play out. After about 15 minutes, Patricia managed to restore order. The board will take this under advisement and consult with our attorney. In the meantime, Xavier, we expect you to remove the bench from your front yard. It's creating a negative impression for the neighborhood. I'll move it to my backyard if you don't retrieve it by Friday, I said. After that, it'll be considered abandoned property. I left before the meeting officially ended. I had said what I needed to say, and I didn't need to sit through another hour of people arguing about something that was legally pretty straightforward. Thursday passed quietly. The bench was still in my front yard. I had gotten a few supportive emails from neighbors, including one from Harold Fitzgerald offering his services if I needed legal representation. I thanked him and said I hoped it wouldn't come to that. Friday afternoon, A truck from a local construction company pulled up and two guys loaded the bench and chains into the back. They didn't knock on my door or speak to me. They just took it and left. I watched from my window and took a video just in case. I thought that might be the end of it. I was very wrong. Saturday morning, I was having coffee on my back porch, looking out at the oak grove when I heard voices. Multiple voices coming from my oak grove. I walked out there and found Patricia Monroe, Carol Winters, and three people I didn't recognize standing in my grove with clipboards and a measuring tape. "What are you doing on my property?" I called out as I approached. Patricia turned to me with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "We're conducting an assessment of the oak trees. Several board members have expressed concern about their health after your removal of the support structure." "Support structure? You mean the bench swing that was illegally installed?" One of the people I didn't recognize, a man in his 40s wearing a polo shirt with a tree service logo, spoke up. "I'm Dennis Hallbrook with Hill Country Tree Care. The HOA contracted us to evaluate these oaks for disease and structural issues." "Did the HOA tell you this is private property and they don't have permission to be here?" Dennis looked uncomfortable. He glanced at Patricia. "I was told this was an HOA common area. It's not. This is the center of my private property. I don't consent to any assessment, and I'm asking all of you to leave immediately." Patricia crossed her arms. "The CC and Articus require proper maintenance of all trees over 6 inches in diameter. We have the right to ensure compliance." "Show me where it says you can enter private property without permission to do that." She couldn't, of course. I pulled out my phone. "I'm going to start recording now. I'm asking all of you to leave my property immediately. If you refuse, I'll call the Travis County Sheriff and report a trespassing in progress." Dennis held up his hands. "Look, I don't want any trouble. I was just hired to look at some trees." He turned to Patricia. "If there's a property dispute, I'm not getting in the middle of it. You need to resolve this before I do any work." He walked away, heading back toward the front of my property. The other two people with him followed quickly. That left Patricia and Carol standing in my oak grove. "You're being absolutely unreasonable," Patricia said. "The board is trying to be responsible stewards of the neighborhood's natural resources. These trees are on my property. They're my responsibility. I take care of them. What you're doing right now is trespassing, and I've asked you twice to leave. I'm not asking a third time. I'm calling the sheriff." I dialed 911 as they watched. When the operator answered, I spoke clearly. "I need to report a trespassing in progress at 847 Oakmont Drive in Cedar Hills. I've asked the individuals to leave my property multiple times and they're refusing." That finally got them moving. Patricia and Carol walked quickly back toward the street, though Patricia threw daggers at me with her eyes the whole way. The sheriff's deputy arrived about 15 minutes later. I met him at the front of my property and explained the entire situation, starting with the bench and now this morning's incident. He took notes and went to speak with Patricia, who was standing with Carol near her car parked on the street. When he came back, he looked tired. "Mr. Zimmerman, she's claiming there's an ongoing dispute about property boundaries and HOA authority." "There's no dispute about boundaries. I have a survey." I pulled it up on my phone where I had saved a PDF. "The oak grove is clearly on my property. As for HOA authority, I've read the CC and Articus cover to cover. There's nothing that gives them the right to enter private property without permission." He looked at the survey on my phone, then nodded. "Okay, I've informed Miss Monroe that she needs to stay off your property unless you give explicit permission. If she comes back, call us and we can pursue criminal trespassing charges. For now, I'm treating this as a civil dispute. What about the fact that they already built a structure on my property without permission?" That's something you'd need to pursue in civil court. We can't make an arrest for something that happened earlier in the week without you filing a formal complaint at the time." I thanked him, and he left. Patricia and Carol drove away shortly after, but not before I saw Patricia on her phone, presumably calling someone. The following Monday, I received a certified letter from the HOA's attorney. My stomach sank when I saw the return address. Legal action was exactly what I was hoping to avoid, not because I was wrong, but because it was expensive and time-consuming. The letter informed me that I was in violation of multiple sections of the Cedar Hills CC and Articus, including failure to maintain community aesthetics, improper storage of materials in a front yard, the bench when it had been there, and refusal to allow necessary property inspections. I was being fined $500 with additional daily fines of $100 until I came into compliance. I immediately forwarded the letter to Harold Fitzgerald, the real estate attorney who had offered his help at the HOA meeting. He called me that evening. "Xavier, this is complete garbage. These aren't legitimate violations. They're retaliating against you for asserting your property rights. Can they do that? They can try. But it's not going to hold up. I'd like to represent you in responding to this. I don't think it'll even get to court. Once we push back properly, they'll back down. What's this going to cost me?" Harold was quiet for a moment. "Here's the thing. I live in Cedar Hills too. I've watched Patricia and this board abuse their authority for years, and I'm tired of it. Most people just pay the fines or comply because it's easier than fighting. I'll represent you pro bono. If we end up actually going to court, we'll discuss fees then, but I think this gets resolved before that." I felt relief wash over me. "Thank you, Harold. Seriously. Don't thank me yet. We've got work to do. I need you to send me every piece of documentation you have. The survey, photos of the bench and installation, copies of the CC and Articus with your notes, records of all communication with the HOA, everything." I spent that evening compiling everything into an organized digital folder and sent it to Harold. He called me back Wednesday morning. "I've drafted a response. I'm sending it to you to review, but here's the summary. We're rejecting all of the alleged violations with specific references to why each one is invalid. We're demanding they rescind the fines. And we're informing them that if they continue this retaliatory behavior, we'll be filing a lawsuit for harassment, trespassing, and property damage related to the tree." Will that work? If their attorney is competent, yes. Because if this goes to court, they'll lose badly and probably end up paying your legal fees on top of it. Harold's letter went out that afternoon. By Friday, I received a response from the HOA's attorney. It was much shorter than the first letter. It said that upon further review, the board was rescinding the fines and violations, but that they reserved the right to pursue the matter if new information came to light. "That's lawyers speak for we're backing down but don't want to admit we were wrong," Harold explained when I forwarded it to him. "I'll send a final letter confirming that they're dropping this and that any future violations must be legitimate and not retaliatory. That should be the end of it." I wanted to believe him, but I had a feeling Patricia wasn't done with me yet. The neighborhood had mostly moved on to other drama by this point. Summer was settling into Texas, which meant temperatures over 100 degrees and everyone staying inside. I didn't see much of my neighbors except in passing. Then in mid-July, I got a notice from Travis County Code Enforcement. Someone had filed a complaint about unpermitted tree damage on my property. The county needed to send an inspector to evaluate the oaks and determine if any violations had occurred. I called Harold immediately. "That's Patricia," he said as soon as I explained. "She couldn't get you through the HOA, so now she's trying to use the county against you. But I didn't damage the trees. The HOA did when they installed the bench. Exactly. Let the inspector come. Show them the documentation of what happened, including the photos of the bolts that the HOA installed. This is going to backfire on her. The inspector came out the following Tuesday. His name was Miguel Santos, and he was a certified arborist with the county. I walked him back to the oak grove and showed him the tree where the bench had been attached. Miguel examined the bolt holes carefully, taking measurements and photos. When did this damage occur? About 6 weeks ago. The HOA installed a bench swing without my permission. I have photos of the entire installation before I removed it. I pulled up the pictures on my phone. He looked through them, then looked back at the tree. These bolts penetrated about 4 inches into the heartwood. That's definitely against code for a protected tree. You can't drill into live oaks like this without a permit, and honestly, no arborist would recommend mounting something this way. I didn't do it. The HOA did. I removed it as soon as I found it. Miguel nodded slowly. Do you have documentation that the HOA installed this? I showed him the trespassing notice I had written, the photos time-stamped from the day I found it, and pulled up the neighborhood Facebook posts from that day showing other people discussing the HOA's new bench. Okay, Miguel said. I'll need to investigate further, but it looks like you're not responsible for the violation. I'll need to determine who authorized this work. Do you know which board member I should contact? Patricia Monroe is the HOA president. But I'd also suggest talking to my attorney, Harold Fitzgerald. He's been handling all of this. Miguel wrote down the information. The tree will be fine, by the way. Live oaks are tough. These holes will compartmentalize and heal over time. There's no structural damage that I can see. He left after taking a few more photos and measurements. I texted Harold to give him a heads up that the county might be calling. 2 weeks later, I got a letter from Travis County Code Enforcement. The investigation had determined that the Cedar Hills HOA had violated county code regarding protected trees by installing fixtures without proper permits. The HOA was being fined $1,500. My property was cleared of any violations. I didn't gloat. I didn't post about it on Facebook. I just filed the letter away with all my other documentation and hoped that Patricia would finally let this go. She did not let it go. In late August, I came home from work to find that someone had spray painted "selfish" in large red letters across my driveway. My mailbox had been knocked over, and someone had dumped a bag of garbage across my front lawn. I called the sheriff's department and filed a report. I also installed security cameras that same week. 4 cameras covering every angle of my property, with motion detection and cloud recording. The deputy who took the report was sympathetic but honest. Without witnesses or video evidence, there's not much we can do. Could be kids, could be related to your HOA dispute. Just keep documenting everything. I also sent an email to Patricia and the HOA board, documenting the vandalism and stating that I would be pursuing all available legal remedies if it continued. Harold reviewed the email before I sent it. The cameras were the best investment I made. 2 nights after I installed them, they caught Patricia Monroe's adult son, a guy in his late 20s, creeping onto my property at 2 a.m. and attempting to spray paint my garage door. The motion sensors triggered lights and an alarm on my phone. I called 911 immediately. The sheriff's deputies caught him trying to run back to his truck, spray paint can still in hand. He was arrested for criminal mischief and trespassing. When they asked him why he did it, he apparently said his mother told him I was ruining the neighborhood and needed to be taught a lesson. Patricia's son, whose name I learned was Connor Monroe, was charged with criminal trespassing and criminal mischief. Because of the prior documented incidents and the clear premeditation, the county attorney decided to prosecute rather than just giving him a citation. I provided the video evidence to the prosecutor. I also provided all of my documentation about the ongoing dispute with Patricia and the HOA, establishing a clear motive for the crime. Harold called me when he heard about the arrest. This changes things. Patricia used her son as a proxy to harass you on her behalf. That could expose her to civil liability and potentially criminal charges as well if they can prove she directed him to do it. I just want this to be over, I said honestly. I'm tired of all of this. I understand, but you need to protect yourself. Let the legal process play out. Connor Monroe's case went to court in October. I had to testify about the history of the dispute, the previous vandalism, and the night he was caught on my cameras. The video evidence was damning. His own statement to the deputies about his mother asking him to teach me a lesson was introduced as evidence. He took a plea deal, deferred adjudication, a year of probation, restitution for the damages to my property, and 100 hours of community service. He also had to stay at least 500 feet from my property at all times, but the prosecutor wasn't done. During the investigation into Connor's actions, they had obtained his phone records and text messages. There were multiple texts from Patricia to Connor in the days before the spray painting incident, including messages like, "Someone needs to show him he can't treat this community like his personal kingdom. And I wish someone would make him understand what he's doing to property values." While Patricia was careful never to explicitly tell Connor to vandalize my property, the prosecutor felt there was enough evidence to charge her with conspiracy to commit criminal mischief. Patricia was arrested in early November. It made the local news. HOA president arrested in neighborhood feud was the headline in the Austin American-Statesman. The article detailed the entire saga, from the bench to the vandalism to Connor's arrest. The Cedar Hills HOA board held an emergency meeting and voted to remove Patricia as president. She resigned from the board entirely a week later. Her criminal case was resolved in December. Like Connor, she took a plea deal. No jail time, but she was placed on probation for 2 years, had to pay a fine, and was required to attend anger management counseling. She was also ordered to stay away from my property. The new HOA president, a reasonable guy named Marcus Johnson who had moved into the neighborhood the year before, reached out to me in January. We met for coffee at a place in downtown Austin. "I want to apologize on behalf of the board for everything that happened," Marcus said. "What Patricia did was completely out of line. The HOA should never have built on your property without permission, and the harassment that followed was inexcusable." "I appreciate that," I said. "I also want to make sure you know that the new board is committed to operating transparently and within our actual authority. We're not going to be installing anything anywhere without proper authorization. And we're reviewing all of our policies to make sure something like this can't happen again." "That's good to hear." Marcus hesitated. "I do have one question, and please know this is just a question, not a request or demand. Several residents have mentioned over the years that they loved walking past your oak grove. I know it's your private property and you have every right to keep it private, but would you ever consider granting some kind of limited access easement for a walking path? The HOA would pay for a proper survey, legal fees, everything, and it would be completely up to you." I thought about it. The grove was beautiful, and I did understand why people enjoyed seeing it. But the last 9 months had left a bad taste in my mouth about sharing anything with the HOA. "I'm not saying no," I finally said, "but I'm not ready to say yes either. Let's see how the next few months go. If the board can demonstrate that they're actually operating reasonably and respecting property rights, maybe we can talk about it later this year." Marcus nodded. "That's completely fair. Thank you for even considering it." We finished our coffee and parted on good terms. I drove home feeling like maybe, finally, this whole mess was behind me. Patricia and her husband moved out of Cedar Hills in February. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that they sold their house and relocated to somewhere up in Dallas. I didn't care where they went, as long as it was away from me. Spring came to Texas, and my oak grove burst into life with new leaves and that particular shade of green that only happens in early spring. I spent more time out there, reading in the evenings and just enjoying the peace. Emma, who had supported me through the entire ordeal, moved in with me in April. We had been talking about it for a while, and after everything that had happened, I realized I didn't want to waste time on things that mattered. She mattered. In May, Harold Fitzgerald invited me to lunch. We met at a barbecue place on the outskirts of Austin, the kind of spot where you order at a counter and sit at picnic tables outside. "I wanted to update you on something," Harold said as we dug into brisket and ribs. "Remember how I mentioned I'd been frustrated with the HOA board's behavior for years?" "Yeah. Well, after everything that went down with you, a group of residents approached me about running for the board in the next election. I'm considering it." "You should do it," I said immediately. "The neighborhood needs someone who actually understands property law and residents' rights." Harold grinned. "I was hoping you'd say that because I was going to ask if you'd endorse me. People know your story. If you publicly supported my candidacy, it would carry weight." "Absolutely. Whatever you need." Harold did run for the HOA board and won easily. Marcus remained as president, but having Harold as a board member provided an important check on any potential overreach. In June, Emma and I hosted a small barbecue in the oak grove. We invited a few neighbors who had been supportive during the whole mess, including Harold and his wife. It was the first time I had really shared the space with others, and it felt good to do it on my own terms. Marcus and his wife were invited too. Over burgers and beer, Marcus brought up the easement idea again very casually. "Have you given any more thought to the walking path concept?" he asked. I glanced at Emma, who squeezed my hand. We had talked about this. "I'd be open to discussing it," I said. "But it would need to be a very limited easement. No structures, no modifications to the land or trees, and I'd want the right to revoke it if problems developed." "That's reasonable. Let me have the HOA attorney draft something and we'll go from there. No pressure." It took 3 months of negotiations and revisions, but in September, we finalized an easement agreement. The HOA paid for a new survey that precisely mapped a narrow walking path along one edge of the oak grove. The easement granted residents the right to walk on that specific path during daylight hours only. No bicycles, no dogs, no groups larger than 4 people at a time. The path couldn't be modified or improved without my written consent. And I retained the right to revoke the easement with 90 days' notice if terms were violated. In exchange, the HOA agreed to pay for professional maintenance of all 7 oak trees on my property twice a year, provided by an arborist of my choosing. They also agreed to indemnify me against any liability for injuries that occurred on the easement path. The path opened in October. The HOA installed a small, tasteful sign at the entrance that read, "Oak Grove Path courtesy of Xavier Zimmerman, private property, stay on designated path." I won't lie, it was strange at first having people walking through what I had come to think of as my private sanctuary. But Emma was right when she said that sharing something beautiful made it more meaningful, not less. The first morning the path was open. I was having coffee on my back porch when I saw an elderly couple walking slowly through the grove, holding hands and looking up at the canopy. The woman had tears in her eyes. Later that day, I got a note in my mailbox from them, thanking me for sharing the space. They had lived in Cedar Hills for 15 years and had always loved the oaks, and they were grateful they could now walk among them. That note made the whole thing worth it. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm after that. The new HOA board was reasonable and professional. When they needed to communicate with residents, they actually communicated instead of just taking action. When there were disputes, they followed proper procedures and respected property rights. I never got an apology from Patricia herself. I didn't expect one. Some people are so convinced of their own righteousness that they can't acknowledge when they've crossed a line. But I didn't need her apology. The legal system had addressed her actions, and she was no longer in a position to harass me or anyone else in the neighborhood. In December, Emma and I got engaged. I proposed under the oaks on a clear, cold evening with the path lights casting soft shadows through the branches. She said yes before I even finished asking the question. We planned a small wedding for the following spring, right there in the oak grove. It seemed fitting. The space that had caused so much conflict had become the center of so many good memories. Harold helped us navigate the permitting and logistics. As an HOA board member, he was able to facilitate the temporary use permits we needed without any drama. The new board approved our request unanimously. The wedding in April was perfect. About 50 people, folding chairs arranged in a semicircle around the largest oak, string lights hung between the trees. Emma wore a simple dress and looked more beautiful than I had ever seen her. We wrote our own vows, and I promised to build a life with her as solid and enduring as the oaks around us. During the reception, Marcus gave a toast that acknowledged the complicated history of the grove. This space represents the best of what community can be when people respect each other's rights and communicate with honesty, he said. Xavier fought for his property rights, but he also found a way to share something beautiful with his neighbors. That's the balance we should all strive for. People applauded, and I saw several neighbors wiping their eyes. Even Harold looked a little emotional, though he blamed it on the champagne. In the months after the wedding, I found myself spending more time on HOA matters, though not in any official capacity. Marcus and Harold would sometimes ask my opinion on property-related issues or disputes. I was happy to help, using my experience to make sure other residents didn't have to go through what I had gone through. The neighborhood changed in subtle ways. People seemed more willing to question the board when something didn't make sense. Meetings became actual discussions instead of the board handing down edicts. Several new board members were elected, who shared the philosophy that an HOA should facilitate community, not control it. Patricia became a kind of cautionary tale. When new residents moved in and asked about neighborhood dynamics, inevitably someone would tell them about the bench incident and what happened when the HOA overstepped. It served as a useful reminder that living in a community meant respecting boundaries, both literal and figurative. I did hear one update about Patricia in late summer. One of my neighbors who kept up with neighborhood gossip mentioned that Patricia's marriage had ended in divorce not long after they moved to Dallas. Apparently, the stress of the criminal charges and the public embarrassment had been too much. I felt a twinge of sympathy, but not much. She had brought all of that on herself through her own choices. Connor, her son, had apparently gotten his life together after his probation. He moved out of state and was working in construction somewhere in Colorado. Good for him, I thought. Everyone deserves a chance to move past their mistakes, as long as they actually learn from them. As for me, life in Cedar Hills became exactly what I had hoped it would be when I first bought my house. I had a beautiful property with mature trees and good neighbors. I had Emma, who had become my wife and my partner in every sense of the word. I had friends like Harold who shared my values and would stand up for what was right. The Oak Grove continued to be a source of joy. I'd often see families walking through in the evening, kids pointing at birds in the branches or hunting for acorns on the ground. Sometimes I'd go out and walk the path myself, seeing my property from the perspective of those passing through. It really was beautiful, and I was glad I could share it, on my own terms. One evening in October, almost 2 years after I first found that bench swing hanging in my tree, I was sitting on my back porch with Emma. We were watching the sunset paint the oak leaves gold and orange, sipping wine and talking about plans for the weekend. "You ever regret how you handled the bench situation?" Emma asked. "Like, do you wish you had tried to talk to Patricia before taking it down?" I thought about it. "No," I said finally. "She made a choice to build on my property without asking. That showed a fundamental disrespect for my rights as a property owner. If I had rewarded that by playing nice and asking politely for her to remove it, it would have sent the message that she could do whatever she wanted, and I'd just go along with it. Sometimes you have to set a hard boundary right away." But everything that followed, the vandalism and the arrests and all of that, do you wish it hadn't escalated? Of course I wish it hadn't escalated, but that escalation was Patricia's choice, not mine. I defended my property. I documented everything. I followed the law. She's the one who decided to retaliate and involve her son in vandalizing my home. That's on her, not me. Emma nodded. "You're right. I guess I just hate that you had to go through all of that stress." "It sucked at the time," I admitted, "but look where we ended up. We're married. We're happy. We have this amazing property that we get to enjoy and share with the community in a way that works for everyone. And the HOA is functioning better than it has in years because people saw what happens when you abuse authority. So maybe it all worked out the way it needed to." We sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the light fade from the sky. A couple walked past on the Oak Grove path, their voices carrying softly through the evening air. They didn't know we were there, couldn't see us on the porch in the gathering darkness. "The trees look healthy this year," the woman said. "They really do," the man replied. "I'm glad that whole thing with the HOA got resolved. Can you imagine if we'd lost access to this place?" They passed out of earshot and I smiled. Emma caught my expression and raised an eyebrow. "What?" she asked. "Nothing," I said. "Just thinking about how things change. 2 years ago, I was so angry about the bench and the invasion of my property. Now people walk through and appreciate the trees and everyone's happy. It's weird how life works out sometimes." "That's because you stood your ground," Emma said. "You didn't let them push you around, but you also didn't become bitter and closed off. You found a middle path, literally." I laughed at her pun and pulled her close. The first stars were appearing overhead, visible through the branches of the oaks. An owl hooted somewhere in the grove, probably settling in for the night's hunting. The community had learned an important lesson through all of this. Property rights mattered. Communication mattered. Respect mattered. An HOA was meant to serve the community, not rule it. And when people lost sight of those principles, there were consequences. For my part, I had learned that standing up for yourself didn't make you selfish or difficult. It made you someone who understood that boundaries existed for good reasons, and that defending those boundaries was not only your right, but sometimes your responsibility. Because when you let someone cross a line once, they'll keep crossing it until you stop them. The bench that started it all was long gone, probably sitting in some HOA storage unit or perhaps sold off after Patricia left the board. But the impact of that bench, the chain of events it set in motion, had fundamentally changed Cedar Hills for the better. People were more engaged now. They attended board meetings and asked questions. They read the CC and Articus and understood their rights. They held the board accountable, and the board, in turn, operated with more transparency and respect for the residents they served. Harold told me once that he wished it hadn't taken such a dramatic situation to wake people up, but he was glad it happened. Sometimes a community needs a crisis to remember what's important, he said. Your situation was that crisis for Cedar Hills. I never set out to be a symbol of property rights or HOA reform. I just wanted to come home from work and enjoy my oak grove in peace. But sometimes life casts you in a role you didn't audition for, and all you can do is play it as honestly as you can. As Emma and I finished our wine and headed inside for the night, I took one last look at the grove. The path lights were on their timer, casting gentle illumination on the trail. The trees stood strong and silent, like they had for 100 years and would for 100 more. I had fought for my right to those trees, to that land, to the peaceful enjoyment of my own property. It had cost me time, stress, and money. It had brought conflict and vandalism and legal proceedings into my life. But standing in that moment, looking at the grove in the peaceful evening, I knew I'd make the same choices again. Because some things are worth fighting for. Your home, your rights, your principles. And when you stand up for those things, even when it's hard, even when people call you selfish or difficult, you're not just defending yourself. You're defending everyone's right to be secure in their own property and their own choices. The oak grove had become more than just trees on my land. It was a testament to what happens when you refuse to back down from what's right, when you document everything, when you follow the law but don't let yourself be intimidated. It was a reminder that communities work best when everyone, including those in authority, respects boundaries and operates with integrity. And on some level, it was proof that even bitter conflicts could eventually transform into something positive. The bench that Patricia installed without permission had led to a properly negotiated easement that genuinely served the community. The harassment and vandalism had led to accountability and reform. The whole messy, stressful saga had ultimately made Cedar Hills a better place to live. I slept well that night, as I did most nights now. The stress and uncertainty of the previous years had faded into memory, replaced by the comfortable rhythms of married life in a community that had learned its lessons the hard way. The next morning, I woke to find a note had been slipped through my mail slot. It was from a new resident who had just moved in down the street. They wanted to thank me for creating the walking path through the oak grove. Their daughter, who was 8 years old, loved nature and asked to walk the path every day after school. The grove had become her favorite place in the whole neighborhood. I showed the note to Emma over coffee. She smiled and said, "See, that's what it was all for." She was right. The fight hadn't been about a bench or even really about property rights, though those were important. It had been about creating the kind of community where people treated each other with respect, where authority was exercised responsibly, and where beautiful spaces could be shared in ways that honored both individual rights and collective joy. The oak grove stood silent witness to all of it. The trees didn't care about property lines or HOA disputes or human drama. They just grew, season after season, providing shade and beauty and shelter for birds and squirrels and the occasional owl. They had been there before me and would be there after me, enduring through whatever conflicts and resolutions humans created around them. But while I was here, while this land was mine, I would protect those trees and care for them. And I would share them with my neighbors in a way that respected everyone involved. That was the balance I had fought for, and that was the balance I had achieved. As I finished my coffee and prepared for the day ahead, I felt a deep sense of contentment. Life in Cedar Hills wasn't perfect, but it was good. The community had been tested and had emerged stronger. My marriage was thriving. My home was truly mine, defended and enjoyed on my own terms. And somewhere in storage, forgotten and gathering dust, was a bench swing with a brass plaque declaring it a community rest area. It served now as nothing more than a reminder of what happens when good intentions are pursued through the wrong methods, when assumptions replace communication, and when authority forgets the limits of its power. I hoped that bench would stay in storage forever, a cautionary tale that never needed to be told again. But if it did need to be told, if someone else in Cedar Hills or any other neighborhood faced similar overreach, I'd be there to share my story and help them stand their ground. Because that's what community really means. Not letting people walk all over you in the name of the greater good, but standing up for what's right while finding ways to make everyone's life better. It's respecting boundaries while building bridges. It's knowing when to fight and when to compromise, and never confusing the two. The sun rose higher, warming the October morning. Through the window, I could see the oak grove beginning to glow with autumn colors. Another season, another cycle, another year of growth and change. And I was ready for all of it, secure in my property, my rights, and my place in a community that had learned, painfully but thoroughly, how to be better.